Hey there, hi. Today's a good day to fix something and help a stranger in the process. Let's go! Before we start, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, iFixit, for making this video happen. Now let's answer some questions for today.
Dear Mercury, I hope this finds you well. I'm needing some help fixing a large hole in my drywall. So what I did is I found a piece of drywall and cut out the center of it to fit the hole. Then I tore off the backing while leaving the center and front backing attached. Then I used some pink Drydex to fill in around the middle and sides of paper, then stuck it in the hole that I made. Then I used more Drydex to fill in the outside, and that's where I'm at. It does not look good at all right now, but I think after some sanding and more Drydex it might look better. If you have any ideas on how to make this better or a way I can improve, it would be greatly appreciated.
There's a lot of different ways to do drywall, and you just so happen to pick the most complicated way. But that's okay. I'm going to show you a method that might help you a little bit more with your skill set and make you feel a bit more confident when you do the work yourself. Okay, let's get a little bit muddy. Now, as you can see here, I already cut out the hole that looks kind of similar to yours. I made it nice and big, so we had a lot of surface area to work with, but we're going to do things a little bit differently. I have some pre-cut wood that I'm going to add into here, and then we're going to put the drywall on top of that so it's nice and sturdy when we're doing the work and we're not working against ourselves, okay? So let's do that. We want to make sure the screw gets nice and sucked in so you're not going to have a bump when you're working on it. And we want to put 2 screws in so we don't have it sliding around. Now that we got all of these screws in, and these are nice and sturdy, we can take our pre-cut piece of drywall, and we can see how that's gonna fit in, just like that. If you have a little bit of ridge here, that's okay, because we're gonna give it an illusion of flatness in just a few minutes when we add mud. But first, we're gonna take the screws and put one right in the center of our screws so we know where the planks are behind the drywall. Isn't that handy? Just like this. One of the cons about doing this type of patch is that later on when you are trying to find a stud, you might accidentally find one of these. But here's the thing, this is still a lot stronger of a patch than other patches you might do. A lot of other patches are just drywall or mesh patches that don't hold up much at all. This itself is one of the strongest patches you can really do. Now, when it comes to mud, there's a lot of different options. We have our 5-minute mud or hot mud, which sets really fast, or we have a joint compound. Now, this takes a lot longer to dry, and there's a lot in between these two options. You have your 20-minute mud, 90-minute mud, and etc. You name it, it's out there. But here's what's a good thing to remember. 5-minute mud doesn't mean it dries in 5 minutes. It means it sets in 5 minutes. Once you mix it and once you start going, it sets instantly. So it starts getting harder, much harder to work with when you have a big patch like this. But because we're strapped for time, we're going to have to use 5-minute mud to make sure it gets done before the end of the day. But I highly recommend, whenever possible, use joint compound. And the reason why is because not only is it a cheaper option than a lot of your other options out there, it also will dry fairly strong and really flexible. Your house naturally moves and changes over the time. Anything will make it change, right? Foundations move it a little bit. This joint compound is going to be more flexible. It's a bamboo stick, essentially, where 5-minute mud is concrete. It will crack. It won't be as flexible. That's why I try to stay away from it. But for today, we're going to try 5-minute mud and see what happens. So let's go. What we're going to need for this is a 12-inch blade for our drywall and a joint knife. Now, we have this mud here, and we also have a glass of water, and we're going to put it in our pan. Now, this is a big hole, so we're going to want to have a lot of mud. But because it sets so fast, we're going to take our time. We're going to do a little bit at a time because there's no way I'm going to mix it fast enough and get it on here in time. First things first, we're going to use something called fiber tape. This has a sticky adhesive in the back, and what we can do is go right over the top of this and kind of just press it down. This is just another version of mesh tape, but this is my preferred method. Now, I'm using anti-stick scissors to make my life a little bit easier down the road, and I'm just gonna make sure it's nice like that. Now, you can overlap this a little bit, but try to keep it not too overlappy, because the more you overlap, the more bunching and the more humps you're gonna create with your mud. Now, you will see there's a little bit of gaps here, and there's okay that there's little gaps. That's not a big deal. We're gonna fix that with mud too, and you don't need your cutout to be a perfect fit for the hole, but the closer you get it, the stronger it will be, okay? So now, let's add some mud. We're gonna add that water in, and we're just gonna mix it right away. It's okay if it gets messy, but be prepared for the mess. And we're just moving it around. There isn't an exact amount of water that's perfect here. Some people are gonna argue and say it's a 1-for-1. Some are gonna say you put a little bit less of water than the mud. It's gonna be different, but no matter what, you want it to look kind of like pancake batter when you're done. Now, since this is 5-minute mud, this is already just enough to get us started. Now, when we're mudding, the most important part is keeping your blade clean and your mud ready to go. So we're gonna take it and we're gonna just scrape off like that, and we're gonna apply it like this. If it's bunching up like that, that means you didn't add enough water, but since this is the first layer, that's okay. We're not talking about full coverage when we are first doing it. We're just talking about getting it on. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of feathering it off. Again, I'm just getting it on there. I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm just trying to make sure that things are getting wet. You want everything where the mesh tape is, you want that to be covered in mud. You don't want the mesh tape to be dry, or it's going to pull up later on. You can see how I'm using 2 of my fingers, and I'm pressing up above here. That's how we're feathering it up. That's how we're making it look clean. Now, again, at the first layer, it doesn't matter too much at the first layer, but as you are building on top of it, it's going to matter more and more. Now that I got a little bit of mud left, now we're going to start doing the rest, okay? Now I'm going to start going in the middle. And we don't want to build the middle up too much. The biggest mistake that I see people do is that they'll build the middle up so much that now we have a big hump in the middle. And now our ramps into the hill are a little bit too small. We need longer ramps the higher this mount is, if that makes sense. I think that's really good for our first layer. We're gonna let this dry, take a few more questions, and come back in a little bit.
Andy, ma'am, I need some help. We've tried, this is the second size we've tried. We've even tried gluing it, and now it's just pulling even worse. But we have tried 2 different size things. These were supposed to be for 50 pounds. Nobody touches this but my husband and me. And this is driving us insane because this is the second set and I'm scared to go bigger. And it's getting ridiculous. Please help. I don't know what to do now.
Well, it seems like today is going to be a very heavy drywall day. But also, just a word of warning. When we're talking about drywall anchors, they're always going to lean on the side of it can handle a lot more than it actually can. See, these are tested in ideal conditions. All of this product, all these things are tested in ideal conditions with brand new drywall that's not 80 years old, drywall that hasn't had a bunch of holes in it, drywall that hasn't had water damage or heat damage. So when we are seeing these ratings, we need to be mindful of the idea that maybe they're best for the materials, like the manufacturers, but not best for our homes. So I'm happy you use the easy anchors. Those are my favorite anchors to use, but I'm going to show you how to patch this hole up and maybe a different product that might work best for you, okay? So let's go get a little bit messy. Now, as you can see, I already made a hole that looks a lot like your hole. And I made one over here too that's kind of similar. So we're going to start with this. Now, if this wasn't over here and you just had two holes that were like this, well, then what we could do is put a different type of wall anchor in here that's going to make your life a little bit easier. Let me show you what that wall anchor is. This is a toggle bolt wall anchor. Now, the way this works is essentially, think of this as an alligator's mouth, and you're having a stick go through the alligator's mouth, and it's angry, right? You want to close that mouth real nice, and then thread it right through that hole. Your hole is already fairly big, so it might not need to be drilled out. But if it is fairly tight, you can just wiggle it in there, push it through, and then the alligator mouth is going to grab from behind. So here it is, the alligator's behind the wall and it's biting into it like this. And that's taking up a lot of surface area. So if you're having a damaged drywall or if you're having continuous problems with it, this anchor might be the best one for you to use because it's taking up so much surface area and it's all metal, so it's not going to snap on you. But now back to the real issue that you're having, and that's this bad boy right here. This is a big flap. There's no strength left in here. The only thing you can do is to patch this up and make sure it's stronger in the future. So what we're going to do is just take this and peel it right off. Don't worry about that extra. And we're just going to make sure we get all of this out. And that's fine, we're making a mess. We're going to fix that in a moment anyways. And then we're going to use a product called DAP Presto Patch. I think this is the most user-friendly, and this is going to fit in the hole nice and tight for us. Here's the thing. You may see this is a 4-inch hole, right? That's going to fill up this tiny little hole. I like to go bigger because then I feel like it's stronger overall because it's fitting nice and tight. You can get ones that are 2.5 or 3 inches as well, but I have a whole bunch of 4 inches, so we're going to go that route, okay? Let's get a little bit messy. When you pull out the Presto Patch, you will notice it has styrofoam. Don't throw away the styrofoam, okay? This is actually the template. So what we're going to do is put it right here where the hole is. And we're just going to draw it out just like this. So that looks pretty good. And now we're going to take a drywall knife and cut that open and get the job done. This is a drywall knife. It looks really intimidating, but trust me, it makes your job a lot easier, okay? We're going to just slide it right through the hole here. And we're just going to go back and forth like we're on a seesaw. Well, I tell you what, I'm tired, but we're so close to being done, so let's go to the next step. We're going to take our sanding block right here. We're going to take out all the rough points right here. Now, it's ready for us to add the Presto Patch like this. And we want to make sure that it's good before we add the mud. Oh, God, we did a good job. I was a little nervous. So now let's go add more hot mud and get this in. Before we add the Presto Patch, we're going to get this whole area saturated with wet mud, okay? We're going to move fast because, again, that darn 5-minute mud likes to dry before we're ready. And if it gets sloppy, that's okay. But look at that. We're doing a great job already, and I'm sure you are too. Here we go. We're going to insert it right here. And look at that. That's perfect. Now we can add the top layer of mud like this. We're going to press it nice and tight in there. And again, we're just trying to make sure everything gets covered because that's going to make drying a lot faster. Now, we're not going to solve this in one pass. It's going to take 2 and 3 passes. And there's nothing wrong with that. That means you're going to have a nice, thorough job. Now I'm just going to try to scrape it off and really try to make sure I'm not building a mount. Now what's happening and really interesting right here is a perfect example of how this is making a mount right before me. There's not much I'm going to be able to do about that besides squeeze it down as much as possible and hope that later on this is not a big molehill for me to try to mow over, okay? If it's getting a little wrinkly, that's okay too. We're going to add one more layer. And as you can see, I'm kind of like working it back and forth. That's very natural. I've been doing drywalling for 15 years and I still work it back and forth all the time. Look at that, it is ready to go. And just like that, as this is drying, down here, this is ready for the second layer. So let's get some joint compound down and put that on top of that 5-minute mud and get that going. Joint compound is used to actually first install your drywall. So it is very great material to use for this stuff. This is affordable stuff. All it takes is a little bit of patience and it's going to work best for you, I promise. So now you can tell I put about 3 or 4 clunks of mud in here. And I'm going to take water. I don't need as much because this is already technically pre-mixed, but I want it to be a little bit thinner than what we were previously working with. So here we go, I'm just gonna mix it in. And if you ever find yourself, oh man, I just put too much water in there, just dump it out. That's okay, it's okay. So we're basically going for pancake batter. But unlike pancake batter, I wouldn't have this with your strawberries in the morning, okay? One of the things we're looking for is we don't want bubbles. Get as many bubbles out as possible. All those bubbles could also indicate as clumps, and we don't want to have an unsmooth surface when we're working with it. Now that that's mixed and ready to go, we're going to switch from the joint knife to our 12-inch blade. Now our 12-inch blade is going to do all the heavy lifting, okay? We're going to go down here. We're going to add it the same thing as before. We're just taking the edges off a little bit so that prevents dripping. And then we're going to just take it and add it on. And we're just going to try to get it to go across like that. Oops. If you have things like that come up, that's okay. We can solve that. It means our pan wasn't completely clean when we were working. But we can work water in there and try to take care of that. We're going to try to keep moving here. We don't want to put too much mud in the middle, so we're trying to press really hard and then out. As you can see, it's really streaky. We can take care of that in just a few seconds. Trying to get that little clunk out that's making that mess in the middle for us over and over again. Good, now I feel more confident that we're gonna get through this without any more problems. And you can already see what I'm kind of doing. I'm already trying to build out the sides. Because again, you're making ramps. Those ramps give the illusion of flatness. You're not going for flatness. You can't make it flat. So I'm going to take this, go up, and I'm going to just press a little harder in the center and loosen up, and that's going to help too. Okay, you can even see that I'm trying to overlap the lines. All that's going to make your life easier later on. And if you don't know if it's flat, right? If you're thinking, Mercury, but how do you know if it's gradual enough so you don't see the hump? I got a secret for you. This was taught by a very good friend of mine who was a mudder for 35 years. And what he told me is you take your knife, your 12-inch blade, no shorter than that, and you put it up against a wall like this. You see that gap right there? It's not much of one. It seems pretty gradual, right? You're like, you can barely see the gap there, Mercury, but that's what we want to focus on. We don't want there to be a gap here. We want there to be a nice, smooth incline all the way to the center, so that way we aren't having issues when we're looking at it and trying to do the finished paint job. So we're gonna take this off and add a little bit more mud down in this area to fill that hole in. When you apply this to the wall, you can also wobble it back and forth. That wobble will also show you that you need to add a little bit more mud in some spots. If it doesn't wobble, you're in a good direction, okay? We are gonna let this dry again and come back in a little bit and try to put on the final layer. Now that that second layer is dry, now we can take off some of the high points with our blade. We're gonna take our blade and just scrape it on the wall like this. Now you may notice I don't sand in between coats. That's because my job is to make it as smooth as possible with each time that I'm doing a coat. You can see that there's definitely lines here, but there's not a lot of lines. I've tried to reduce as many lines as possible on here to make my job a little bit easier and keep everything fairly level and smooth all the way across. But all that being said, I'm just gonna cover it up anyways, and I'm building on top of it. I'll sand it when it's all done. So now we're gonna do something called a skim coat. A skim coat is a pretty thin layer of mud that's gonna take it and go all the way across. But I'm pulling it tighter than I did before. And I'm trying to make sure I get all these little spots out of there. I'm trying to reduce as many lines as possible, but we can take off a lot of the high points when we start sanding. Okay, now we're gonna wait for this to dry to finish it, but while this is drying, let's go up here. We have this other patch we're working on, right? This is basically the same approach. We did the first one with 5-minute mud, now we're gonna use joint compound. But I don't think we're gonna have to do 3 coats. I think we're gonna be able to get away with just the second one right here. I'm gonna take my 12-inch knife and I'm gonna go right above it. You can see that a 12-inch knife, it covers the whole area. And that's why I think we're only gonna need a 1 coat, because we can just spread our fingers out like this, squeeze it down, and pull it tight. Again, if you get little uneven lines and little scrapes, we can take care of that. And we're just keeping applying it until we get it where we want it. Now I'm gonna apply my fingers like this. I'm gonna put a lot of pressure on the top part and really fan. You can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm really pushing down real hard in this top part and angling it downward so it's not hitting as hard down here. A lot of pressure above. I'm fanning the top. I'm doing the reverse down here. And then in the middle, I'm gonna take it out, try to be even. Try to take that high point out, fan it out. Perfect. This will be good to dry, and then we can sand it down on both of these, and then we're good to go. Look at that. Now that both of our big patches are nice and done, we're gonna take a look at a few things. We're gonna notice how nice the feathering off point is and how very few lines are here. If I was gonna do this as someone's house, or if I was gonna do this in my own home, I would make sure I did 1 more skim coat like I did down here. Now, speaking of down here, we can really see this turned out pretty good. Now, we would probably add texture to this wall, and all the little imperfections wouldn't be noticed as much. I would also probably add a little bit more mud on this side because that ramp, again, isn't far out enough. But overall, pretty satisfied with this. Now, we're going to do some sanding, which is gonna get me pretty dusty. But before we do that, there's 2 things you might wanna know. If you're someone who can't have dust in your home, you can use low dust or dust control mud. Dust control mud is joint compound that specifically is a little bit lighter and isn't going to get everywhere, okay? You can also get a sanding block and then soak it in water and then do something that's called wet sanding. Wet sanding is taking a wet sanding and it's sanding block, and it's just gonna grab all of the dust that's in the air as it's going along. It's a lot longer of a process, and with a patch this big, I don't recommend doing that because of how long it's going to be. Now, if we only use joint compound and we didn't use 5-minute mud, you could take a wet rag and just feather off the sides, and that would be enough because that joint compound can be always wiped away. That also says that if you drop any joint compound on the ground, you can clean that up even if you're on carpet by taking a wet rag to it. But if it's 5-minute mud, you're not going to be as lucky, okay? We're just going to use a regular sanding block to do all of this, okay? Another important fact is that you might get to a point where you're like, boy, should I use an orbiter sander? And the answer to that is absolutely not. An orbiter sander is going to move real fast, and it's going to often take off way too much. We don't want to use that. The sanding block gives us the most control and make sure that we're not going to overdo it. There's been often times where I've been in a hurry, and I used an orbiter sander, and then I got to restart the job. You don't want to be in that position. Learn from my mistakes. You can see that I'm spending a lot of time on the edges. I'm spending a lot of time on the edges because I want to make sure it's all feathered off. I don't want any hard lines. If there's any like ridges, we want to get rid of that because we don't want it to be something that's going to be there when we add the primer and the paint after this. We're not going to do that because we don't have the time. But if you do it at home, be mindful of that. Now this big patch is all sanded down. There might be 1 or 2 points I would want to take care of before we added the paint. But overall, I'm really proud of this. But when you run your hand across it, you know it's there. And that's not a bad thing. It's always going to be there. See, the wall sustained trauma. The trauma isn't going to go away just because you covered it up. The trauma is going to stay there. But now, all we did was we made sure we extended it and we tried to mask the trauma as much as we could. And we strengthened it to make sure it can hold itself up. We don't ignore the trauma, we deal with it head on, and we try to make sure it's stronger for the next time. Now we're going to move up to the little bit smaller one, and we're just going to ignore this because we would add the skim coat if we were really doing this wall. Woof! I think we did a pretty good job today. This looks pretty smooth. I'm very happy with it. And I'm very happy with this one. And I hope that you're happy with your projects too. Huh, what a day. Drywall is such a messy job. It's so hard to do and not get it everywhere. But here's the thing. Drywall is also one of the most rewarding ways that you can fix anything. I love it so much. You get to get dusty and a little bit musty, but boy, do you get the job done. And remember, if you're an artist or if you're someone who you don't think that this work is for you, this might be the kind of thing that's for you. There's a little bit of art that goes into drywall mudding, and I hope you found it today. Now remember, you're worth the time it takes to learn a new skill. Have a good day, take care, and bye-bye. They don't call their bibs for nothing, you know?